They say you never get a second chance to make a first impression, but nobody tells you what happens when the first impression was made in disguise. This is the story of a duke who arrived at a crumbling English estate dressed as a common stable hand, certain he was walking into a trap, and found instead the one woman in England who was not performing for anyone. It begins, as all dangerous things do, with a letter and a desperate father. The autumn of 1814 did not arrive at Ashworth Park the way autumn arrives in poets' verses. It arrived like a landlord, cold, insistent, seeping through the ill-fitting window frames of the old stone house with the patient certainty of something that knows it will eventually be let in. The surrounding Derbyshire moorland had turned the color of rust and dying bracken. The oak trees lining the carriage drive had shed half their leaves already, and nobody had raked them because the groundskeeper had been quietly let go in August, and his absence had not yet been explained to anyone who might ask questions. Ashworth Park had been a proud house once. 3 generations of the Caldwell family had lived well within its walls, had hosted dinners and dances, had kept 12 indoor servants and a full stable, had been the kind of family that other families in the county measured themselves against. That was before Sir Edmund Caldwell's investments had failed. Not dramatically, not in one catastrophic moment. Slowly, the way a good coat wears thin. At the cuffs first, then the collar, then everywhere simultaneously until the cold comes through no matter how you hold yourself. Now the house ran on pretense and the extraordinary quiet competence of its elder daughter. Eleanor Caldwell was 25 years old, and she was the reason Ashworth Park had not yet collapsed entirely. She was not the daughter anyone looked at first. That was Cecily. 21, fair-haired, blue-eyed, with the particular English rose beauty that portrait painters have been reaching for since the Tudor period. Cecily entered rooms the way weather enters rooms. You felt her before you saw her, and once you saw her, everything else became backdrop. She had been told she was extraordinary since the cradle and had accepted this as straightforwardly as she accepted breakfast. Eleanor was the other one. Darker, quieter, taller than was fashionable, with serious brown eyes that saw considerably more than she ever commented upon. Her gowns were the soft, muted colors of moorland, deep greens and charcoal grays and the particular brown of wet earth after rain. Cecily called them dull. Eleanor thought of them as honest. She was the one who rose at 6 to review the household accounts. She was the one who knew which chimney drew properly and which would smoke if the wind came from the east. She was the one who had quietly renegotiated with the butcher, the candlemaker, and the wine merchant, had managed each conversation with such dignity that none of them had felt they were being asked for charity, though in a sense they were. She was the scaffolding, Cecily was the facade, and the world, as it generally does, admired the facade and forgot entirely that scaffolding exists. The morning the letter arrived was an ordinary Tuesday in October. Sir Edmund sat at the head of the breakfast table, staring into his teacup with the expression of a man who has run out of prayers. Lady Caldwell, a gentle, anxious woman who had dealt with the family's decline by choosing increasingly not to notice it, picked at a piece of toast with a fork. Cecily sat across from her in a muslin morning dress, drumming one perfect finger against the tablecloth, already bored before the day had properly started. "Another day of this wretched rain," Cecily announced to the room. "If we do not go to London for the season, I shall lose my mind completely. I am absolutely wasting away here." Sir Edmund flinched. London meant money. The season meant expense. Both meant a conversation he had been avoiding for the better part of a year. It was at precisely this moment that Hobbs, their aging butler, entered with a letter on a silver tray that had not been properly polished since June. He presented it to Sir Edmund with the gravity that Hobbs brought to all things, regardless of whether the occasion merited it. Sir Edmund broke the seal. His face did something Eleanor had not seen it do in 3 years. It came alive. "Good Lord," he breathed. He looked up, his eyes unfocused, as though he was seeing the room from a great distance. "Good Lord. Edmund, what on earth?" Lady Caldwell began. "Ashford," he said. "The Duke of Ashford." Cecily went very still. Every person in England with any connection to society knew that name. The Duke of Ashford was 33 years old, unmarried, and so wealthy that the word wealthy seemed inadequate, like calling the North Sea damp. He owned estates in 3 counties, coal interests in the north, shipping investments, and a London townhouse in Grosvenor Square that was spoken of in the same reverent tones usually reserved for cathedrals. He was also, and this was the detail that made him truly legendary, almost entirely invisible. He did not attend balls. He did not participate in the season. He was spoken of constantly and seen almost never, which had elevated him in the social imagination to something approaching myth. "What about the Duke of Ashford?" Cecily asked, and her voice had changed entirely. Sharpened, focused, the boredom evaporating like morning frost. Sir Edmund read from the letter, his voice unsteady. "His Grace's man of business writes to propose an alliance." He swallowed. "A marriage. In exchange for a full settlement of all outstanding debts and an annual income sufficient to maintain Ashworth Park in proper order. His Grace requests the hand of a Caldwell daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. And then Cecily laughed, a small, bright, entirely self-satisfied sound, and reached up to touch her fair curls with the automatic vanity of someone who has never doubted the mirror. "Well," she said serenely, "I suppose that answers the question of London." It was not even a question in her mind. It had not occurred to her, not for a single heartbeat, that the offer could be intended for anyone other than herself. The world was organized around girls like Cecily Caldwell. It always had been. Eleanor said nothing. She looked at the window, at the gray October rain running down the glass in slow, crooked lines. She felt nothing exactly. Or rather, she felt something so familiar it had lost its edges. The quiet, settled knowledge of her own irrelevance. Of course it was Cecily. It was always Cecily. She picked up her teacup, found it empty, and stood to refill it herself because the housemaid was otherwise occupied. "He arrives Friday," her father was saying, his voice giddy with relief. "We must prepare. We must make the house." "Leave it to me," Eleanor said from the sideboard. Nobody thanked her. Nobody noticed the particular quality of her voice when she said it. She began composing the list of what needed to be done. In London, in his study in Grosvenor Square, James Cavendish, the 6th Duke of Ashford, sat opposite his solicitor, Mr. Fellows, and read Sir Edmund Caldwell's letter of acceptance with the expression of a man watching a chess piece move exactly as he predicted. He set the letter down. "It is agreed then, Mr. Fellows said, carefully. "The Caldwell family accepts the arrangement. You will travel to Ashworth Park on Friday." James said nothing for a moment. He walked to the window. Below, Grosvenor Square was busy with carriages and pedestrians, the ordinary commerce of a London morning. He was 33 years old. He had been the Duke of Ashford since he was 28, inheriting a title that came with vast wealth and, less visibly, more lethally, vast debt. His father had been a man of magnificent tastes and catastrophic financial judgment. James had spent 5 years quietly, systematically, furiously rebuilding what his father had nearly destroyed. He had worked like a man possessed, had denied himself every luxury, had earned a reputation for coldness and reclusiveness that he had not bothered to correct because correcting it would have required social energy he did not have. He had saved the estate. But the final piece, the piece that would secure everything permanently, that would provide the capital to complete the northern mine improvements and pay the last of his father's gambling debts, was a marriage. Specifically, the dowry attached to a marriage. Specifically, the dowry of £25,000 held in trust for the daughter of Sir Edmund Caldwell, released upon her wedding. Mr. Fellows had found the Caldwells, desperate family, suitable connections, marriageable daughter. James despised every word of it. Not the practicality. He had made peace with the practicality. He despised the theater. The idea of arriving at some carefully dressed country house to inspect a carefully dressed daughter who had been prepared for his inspection like a painting being hung for auction. He had built everything on his ability to see clearly. He was not about to stop now. "Cancel the Friday carriage," he said. Mr. Fellows looked up sharply. "Your Grace, I will ride to Derbyshire alone. I will arrive Thursday. I will not be announced." He turned from the window. "I will see this family as they are, Fellows, not as they intend to appear. That is highly irregular, Your Grace. If Sir Edmund were to discover, then I shall take care not to be discovered." His voice was flat, final. "I have no intention of selling my name and my future to a family I have never seen behave honestly. I will see them honestly first. Then I will decide." Mr. Fellows, who had learned when arguing with the Duke was productive and when it was simply noise, gathered his papers. "Very good, Your Grace," he said. He arrived at Ashworth Park on a gray Thursday afternoon on horseback, dressed in the plain wool coat and worn boots of a traveling working man. No crest on his saddlebag, no livery. Just a tall, dark-haired man on a very good horse, which was the one detail he could not entirely disguise. He came around to the stable yard at the back of the house, as a man looking for work would come. A young stable boy ran out, eyes wide at the quality of the animal. "Take him," James said, his voice stripped of its ducal authority, pitched to the quiet directness of a man used to working yards. "Rub him down well. I'm here on an errand for a gentleman coming tomorrow. Might need a bed in the servants' quarters tonight if there's room." The boy nodded, too focused on the horse to look carefully at the man. James moved away from the stable, keeping to the shadows of the old yew hedge that ran along the east side of the house. The household was clearly in a state of frantic preparation. He could hear it, see it in the lit windows and the movement of figures within. They were dressing the house for his arrival tomorrow. He moved along the hedge toward the rear garden, and then he heard voices, a walled garden, old stone walls, a wooden gate standing slightly open. He stopped outside it, in the deep shadow of the yew, and listened. Two women, seated on a stone bench near a bare rose arbor. The last roses of the season were hanging on gamely faded pink against the gray stone. He could see them through the gate's gap. One fair, vivid, animated. One darker, quieter, still. The fair one was speaking. I simply cannot decide between the ivory silk and the pale blue for Friday. The ivory is more bridal, obviously, but the blue brings out my eyes, and first impressions are everything with men like Ashford. The quiet one said nothing. They say he is as cold as a January grave, the fair one continued, with the cheerful pragmatism of someone who has decided that obstacles are simply problems to be managed. Dreadfully serious. Probably spends his evenings reading agricultural reports. A small laugh. But he is enormously, magnificently rich, and that, my dear Eleanor, covers a great many deficiencies in a husband's character. Eleanor, so the quiet one had a name. And once I am settled, Cecily continued, dropping her voice to the conspiratorial register of someone who trusts that she is not being overheard, there is always Captain Harwell. He has admired me since the Milford Assembly. A duchess with an establishment of her own has a great deal of freedom, hasn't she? A great deal of scope for friendships. James went perfectly still. He felt the cold not just from the October air, but from something deeper, the recognition of exactly the thing he had come to find. Not just ambition, not just vanity. This was something colder. A woman who was already, before the ink was dry on any agreement, planning to make him a fool. He was about to turn, about to walk back to the stable, retrieve his horse, and ride south and let the whole arrangement dissolve. Let the estate manage. Let the miners wait. He would find another way. He would find any other way rather than this. But then Eleanor spoke. You should not say such things, Cecily. Her voice was low, not scandalized. That would have been performance. Simply, direct, honest. The voice of someone who says what she means, because she has never seen the point of any alternative. Oh, Eleanor. Cecily's tone was the patient, slightly pitying warmth of someone who loves you and considers you a lost cause. You are so dreadfully serious. It is why you are sitting here in that gray dress while I am going to be a duchess. A pause. I am sitting here, Eleanor said quietly, because someone has to check that the rose arbor hasn't come loose from the wall in the last storm. It has, by the way. The eastern bracket wants a new bolt. James almost smiled. What I am saying, Eleanor continued, and now something had changed in her voice. Not louder, but clearer. The way a voice changes when it is saying the thing it actually believes rather than the thing that is expected, is that you are building everything on sand. A title is not a life, Cecily. Wealth is not a home. And a marriage begun in deception, she paused, is not a foundation. It is a trap. For both of you. You sound like a sermon. Perhaps sermons exist because people keep needing to hear the same things. Cecily stood up, shaking out her muslin skirts with the decisive energy of someone closing a door on an argument they have no intention of losing. You are 25 years old and you have never had a suitor. So perhaps you might leave the theory of marriage to those with some prospect of practical experience. She said it lightly. As one says things one does not quite intend as cruelly as they land. Come inside soon. I need you to dress my hair before dinner. She swept back toward the house. Eleanor sat alone on the bench. James did not move. He watched her. She did not cry. He had somehow known she would not cry. She sat with the particular stillness of someone who has heard difficult things so many times that she has learned to let them pass through rather than land. After a long moment, she reached out and touched one of the last roses on the arbor, gently. Checking the stem, he realized, checking whether it was worth saving, whether it might last another week if properly supported. Even now, even alone, even having just been told, with casual sisterly cruelty, that she was 25 and without prospects, she was tending to something. Something shifted in James Cavendish, not a dramatic shift, not the kind that announces itself, the quiet kind. The kind that happens below the surface, like the first movement of ice in a river in early spring, when nothing is visible yet but something fundamental has changed direction. He had come to Ashworth Park to see through a performance. He had seen through it. He had also, unexpectedly, seen something that was not a performance at all. And that was the thing he had not planned for. He looked at the contract in his mind, as though reading its exact language for the first time. The hand of a Caldwell daughter. Sir Edmund Caldwell had 2 daughters. James stood in the shadow of the yew hedge for a long moment, thinking with the concentrated precision that had rebuilt a ducal fortune from ruin. Then he turned and walked quietly back to the stable yard. He had seen enough. Friday arrived with the thin, polished sunshine of a late English autumn morning. The kind of light that is beautiful precisely because you know it won't last. Eleanor had been awake since 5. The house was as good as she could make it. The silver was polished. The best linens were on the guest bed. The Rose Arbor's eastern bracket had been quietly replaced at dawn by the stable boy she had bribed with a jar of Cook's preserved plums. The cracked plaster in the entrance hall had been covered with a framed landscape watercolor that had lived in the upstairs court for 20 years. She had done what she always did, made the imperfect presentable, made the difficult invisible, made everything work. Cecily descended the staircase at 11 o'clock in the pale blue silk. She had decided against the ivory, looking so genuinely, effortlessly beautiful that even Eleanor, who had looked at her sister every day for 21 years, felt the force of it. They assembled in the entrance hall, Sir Edmund in his best coat, Lady Caldwell in dark green silk, Cecily at the front, positioned as naturally as a painting positions its subject. Eleanor near the door, slightly behind, as she always was. At precisely noon, the sound of a single horse on the gravel, not a grand ducal carriage and 4, not outriders, not the elaborate procession of a great lord arriving in state. One horse, one rider. Eleanor frowned slightly. The door opened, Hobbs managing his dignity, and in stepped the Duke of Ashford. He was not what anyone in the hall had constructed in their imagination. He was tall, dark-haired. His coat was deep charcoal, perfectly cut, his cravat simply tied, his boots impeccably clean but carrying the suggestion of a man who does not fuss. His face was all clean angles and contained authority, handsome in the way of a well-made thing rather than a decorative one. He moved with the particular economy of a man who has never needed to perform his importance because it has never been in question. Eleanor's breath did something involuntary. Then she recognized him. Not his face, she had never seen his face, but the height, the quality of stillness, the way he moved through the doorway with that specific, controlled, purposeful quietness. The stable hand from last night. He had been here already. He had come early and come disguised, and he had been here, yesterday, in this house. Her mind moved very quickly through what that meant and arrived, with a cold clarity, at the garden. He had been in the garden. He had heard. She went very still. Not visibly, she was too practiced at not being visible in her reactions. But inside, something had gone completely quiet. James accepted Sir Edmund's welcome with measured courtesy. He inclined his head to Lady Caldwell. His eyes moved to Cecily. He saw everything he had heard yesterday, expressed now in the most polished possible form. The practiced smile, the perfect posture, the precise deployment of beauty. He saw it all. Then his eyes moved past her. They found Eleanor, standing in her usual place near the door, in a deep green wool dress that she had not bought for this occasion, but which happened to suit her very well. Their eyes met. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. She did not look away. He said nothing. He moved through the formal introductions with perfect propriety. He took tea in the drawing room. He was courteous and entirely unreadable, and Cecily deployed every skill she possessed to charm him. She was brilliant at it, genuinely skilled, genuinely warm when she tried. He listened to her with polite attention. He felt nothing. During a pause in conversation, Lady Caldwell had gone to the window to exclaim about a pheasant on the lawn. Cecily had turned to pour more tea. Sir Edmund was consulting his watch. James set down his teacup and looked directly at Eleanor, who was sitting quietly near the fireplace. "Miss Caldwell," he said. Everyone in the room assumed he was addressing Cecily. Cecily turned back with her smile ready. "The elder Miss Caldwell," he said. The room processed this slowly, like cold water through stone. Eleanor looked at him. "Your Grace." He stood, crossed the room, stopped before her. She was looking up at him with those serious brown eyes. The eyes that had seen through the stable hand's disguise the moment she understood, and there was no fear in them, no performance, just direct, unflinching, honest looking. "I have reviewed the terms of the arrangement," he said, his voice quiet but clear to every corner of the silent room. "The contract specifies the hand of a Caldwell daughter." A pause. "I would like it to be yours." The silence that fell was the most complete Eleanor had ever heard. Then Cecily said, "That is not," and stopped. Her voice had gone very thin. Sir Edmund said, "Your Grace, there must be some." "There is no misunderstanding," James said, without looking away from Eleanor. "I have made my choice. I am asking Miss Eleanor Caldwell if she will accept." He held out his hand. Eleanor looked at it. She looked at her family, at Cecily's face where the polished composure had cracked into something raw and lost, at her father's bewildered relief, at her mother's tearful confusion. None of them were looking at her to understand what she felt. They were looking at the thing that had changed for them, as they had always looked at her, as they had always missed her. She looked at the hand in front of her. She thought about the Rose Arbor bracket, replaced at dawn. She thought about the accounts she had been balancing for 3 years. She thought about gray dresses and being useful and never being seen. She thought about what this man had done, had dressed as a servant, had come in disguise, had stood in a garden in the cold to find the truth. She did not know yet why he had chosen her, but she knew he had chosen her with his eyes open. That was more than she had ever been given. She placed her hand in his. "Yes," she said, quietly, completely. His fingers closed around hers. Steady, certain. The world rearranged itself around that single point of contact. The journey to Dunmore Hall, the Duke's principal seat in Northumberland, was made in his carriage over 2 days. They sat across from each other, mostly in silence, which Eleanor found she did not mind. He read. She looked at the passing countryside. Once, when the carriage hit a deep rut and lurched badly, he reached across to steady the small traveling case on the seat beside her without being asked, without commenting on it, and then went back to his reading. It was a small thing. She thought about it for a long time. Dunmore Hall was enormous and beautiful and cold, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The rooms were perfectly maintained and completely unlived in. Every surface was in its correct place, and nothing had been touched with any warmth in a long time. The staff were excellent and silent and slightly afraid. Eleanor walked through it on her first morning and felt it, the same quality she had felt in the Ashworth Park estate books. Something that had been well managed but never tended. She began with the things nobody would notice. She learned the name of every servant within a week. She asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Holt, a formidable woman who had served the Ashford Dukes for 25 years, to walk her through the house properly, not as a showcase, but as a working home. Mrs. Holt, who had expected the new Duchess to be either ornamental or interfering, found herself, with some surprise, being asked intelligent questions and listened to with genuine attention. By the end of the first month, Eleanor had quietly reorganized the kitchen stores, identified a damp problem in the east wing that had been papered over for 2 winters, arranged for the lesser-used rooms to be properly aired rather than shut indefinitely, and established a habit of taking her morning tea in the servants' hall on Wednesdays, which initially terrified the staff and eventually became the thing they mentioned first when anyone asked them about the new Duchess. James watched all of this without commenting on it. He came home from his rides and his days in the estate office to find small, precise changes that made the house feel different without being able to immediately name how. A fire in a room that had not had one. Books organized on the library shelves so that they could actually be found. The long dining table reduced to the size at which 2 people could have a conversation. One evening, he stopped in the doorway of the library and watched Eleanor for a long moment before she heard him. She was standing on the library ladder, replacing a volume on the upper shelf, her dark hair loosely pinned, her gray dress. She still wore gray, slightly dusty at the hem. She was entirely absorbed in what she was doing, humming something very quietly to herself. "You are reorganizing my library," he said. She looked down, unsurprised to be observed, by subject and then by date. The previous system appears to have been by size of volume, which is aesthetically pleasing and intellectually useless. He looked around at the changed shelves. "I have been looking for a copy of Malthus's essay for 6 months, he said. She descended the ladder and crossed to a shelf midway along the east wall. She pulled out the volume without hesitating and handed it to him. He looked at the book. He looked at her. "How did you know where?" "I read the spines as I worked," she said simply. "I remember where things are." A pause. "Eleanor," he said. It was the first time he had used her name without formality. She looked at him. He was holding the Malthus. He looked. For the first time since she had met him, not like a duke, just like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just set it down for a moment. "The northern mine," he said, "the one the dowry was meant to fund." He paused. "It is not the only problem. There is. The situation is more extensive than I made it appear in the arrangement." She waited. "I was not fully honest," he said, and the words clearly cost him something. "About the degree of difficulty. I led your father to believe the estate was largely sound." A pause. "It is not largely sound, it is viable. But it requires more than money. It requires someone who understands how things actually work." He looked at her steadily. "I am telling you now because I should have told you before, and because I have watched you for 6 weeks, and I believe you are perhaps the only person I have ever met who I could tell this to without it being used against me." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "You dressed as a stable hand," she said, "and stood in my garden in the cold to discover whether your future wife was honest." She tilted her head slightly. and then you withheld material information from her before the wedding. He had the grace to look, briefly, like a man caught. Yes, he said. That is, she said, somewhat ironic. He looked at her, and she saw it, the thing she had only glimpsed before. Behind the controlled, authoritative, ducal exterior, there was a man who was genuinely, privately, a little afraid. Of the scale of what he was managing, of the loneliness of it, of the things she had said in the garden about building on sand, which had lodged in him like a splinter. Show me the accounts, she said. He blinked. Eleanor, all of them. The real ones. She crossed to the desk and sat down in the chair opposite his. I have been doing the accounts for Ashworth Park since I was 17. I am not going to faint at a column of figures, however large they are. She folded her hands on the desk. We are either partners or we are not. Which is it? He looked at her for a long time. Then he sat down, opened the desk drawer, and put the real ledgers in front of her. They worked until the candles burned low. She found 3 things within the first hour that he had not found in 3 years. Not because he was not intelligent, but because he had been too close to the problem, had been looking at it with the frightened eyes of a man who cannot afford to see certain things clearly. She saw them clearly because she had no fear attached to them. They were simply numbers. Numbers could be worked with. He watched her work and felt something he had not felt in 5 years. Not alone. The damp problem in the East Wing turned out to be the key. When Eleanor investigated further, in the practical, thorough, sleeves-rolled-up manner she brought to everything, she discovered that the East Wing had been built over a natural spring that had been diverted in 1740 and had gradually been reasserting itself. The solution was engineering rather than continual repair. Expensive initially, eliminating the need for recurring costly patching indefinitely thereafter. She presented her findings to James on a Tuesday morning with a sketch she had made herself. He looked at the sketch. He looked at her. Where did you learn to? My father's estate manager taught me to read a survey map when I was 14, she said. He said someone in the family ought to know how, and I was the one who asked. He looked at the sketch for a long moment. You are extraordinary, he said. She blinked. It was so direct, so unadorned, so entirely unlike the careful, measured way he said everything else. I am practical, she said, because it was what she always said. I know, he said. That is precisely why you are extraordinary. She did not know what to do with that. She looked at the sketch. She straightened the corner of it unnecessarily. He reached across the desk and covered her hand with his. The same hand she had placed in his in the entrance hall at Ashworth Park. The hand that had signed 3 years of accounts and replaced Rose Arbor brackets at dawn and carried things nobody else had been willing to carry. I owe you an honest conversation, he said quietly. You owe me several, she said, but her voice had gone soft. I stood in your garden, he said, and I heard you say that kindness is a home and honesty is a home. He looked at her steadily, and I thought, I have a house, a title, an estate. I have fought for 5 years to save all of it, but I do not have a home. He paused. I had not understood until that moment that those were different things. Eleanor looked at him. The autumn light was coming through the library windows, falling warm and golden across the changed, tended, finally lived-in room. You chose me, she said slowly, because of what you overheard. I chose you, he said, because in a garden at dusk, when no one was watching, you were exactly the same as you are now. No performance, no calculation. He pressed her hand slightly. Do you have any idea how rare that is? She thought about it honestly, in the way she thought about everything. I had no one to perform for, she said. You had yourself, he said, and you chose honesty anyway. She looked at him, this complicated, guarded, frequently difficult man who had disguised himself as a servant to find the truth and had found something he had not been looking for, who had shown her the real accounts, who had said you are extraordinary without softening it into something easier. I love you, she said. It came out very simply, with no ceremony. The way the truest things tend to come out. His face changed. The controlled architectural expression that he wore like armor, it shifted, became something younger. Something that had been waiting a long time to be allowed. I know I am not easy to love, he said. No, she agreed, but I was never especially looking for easy. He brought her hand to his lips. I love you, Eleanor, he said against her fingers. I believe I have since the Rose Arbor, she laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her. You were watching me check a garden bracket. You were checking a garden bracket at dusk, alone, after your sister had just been unkind to you, he said. And you checked it with exactly the same care you would have given it if nothing difficult had just happened. He looked at her. That told me everything I needed to know about who you were. She looked at their joined hands. We are going to be very well suited, she said quietly. I believe so, he said. though I reserve the right to be difficult on occasion. And I reserve the right to reorganize things that need reorganizing, including my library, including your library." He almost smiled. She was beginning to know that almost. "Then we are agreed," he said. The following October, Dunmore Hall looked like a different house. Not different in its bones. It was still the great Northumberland stone pile it had always been. Still commanding the same sweep of moorland, still magnificent in the autumn light. But it had something it had not had for a long time. It was inhabited. Fires burned in rooms that had been cold for years. The library was a room people actually spent time in. The staff moved through the corridors with a different quality of ease. The garden had been properly attended to. And the roses, there were a great many roses now, because Eleanor had discovered a passion for them that she had never had the space to act on, were extraordinary. James came to find her there on a Sunday afternoon in the walled rose garden, assessing the last blooms of the season with her usual focused attention. He stood watching her for a moment before she heard him. She looked up, pushed a loose strand of dark hair from her face, looked at him with those steady, serious brown eyes that he had learned to read as fluently as the estate accounts. "The mine survey came back," he said. "I know. Fellows sent a copy to me as well." He raised an eyebrow. "I asked him to," she said unapologetically. He came to stand beside her. "The figures are good," he said. "Better than projected." "Yes," she said. "I thought they would be once the drainage issue was properly addressed." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the roses. "Eleanor." "Yes, I went to Ashworth Park," he said. "Certain I was walking into a trap. I know. I came dressed as a servant to catch a schemer. I know that too. I found," he paused. "You," she looked at him. "Checking a rose arbor bracket," she said. "Being completely, exactly, irreducibly yourself," he said, "when you had every reason to be otherwise." She considered this. "It did not occur to me to be otherwise," she said honestly. "No," he said. "That is precisely the point." He put his arm around her shoulders, a thing he had learned to do. This man who had not known how to be warm because nobody had ever required it of him, and he had never required it of himself. She leaned into it slightly, the way a well-trained rose leans toward good light. The October afternoon settled around them. The moorland stretched away to the north, vast and honest. Dunmore Hall stood behind them, warm with fires and tended with care, and finally, a home. The lesson here is the truth this story tells. James Cavendish came in disguise because he did not trust what he would be shown. He was right not to trust it. The performance was exactly what he suspected. But the thing that changed everything was not what he uncovered. It was what he saw when nobody was performing. A woman alone, checking a bracket on a rose arbor after being told she was invisible, and checking it with exactly the same care she would have given it on the best day of her life. That is character. That is who you are when the audience has left and the lights are down and nobody is watching and you tend to things anyway. Be that person. And really look, for that person in others. Because the world is very loud about the Cecilys. It takes a little more attention to find the Eleanors. They are always there. They are always worth finding. If this story moved something in you, tell us where you are watching from and what it made you feel. And if you know an Eleanor, someone who holds things together quietly, who tends to things when no one is watching, share this with them. Subscribe so you never miss a new story. We will be here.